Okay, let's dive straight into this explainer and tackle a massive historical myth that honestly most of us completely misunderstand. We interact with cars every single day, right? Our whole world is basically built around them. But the actual story of their origin is way more complex and honestly a lot more fascinating than just a simple name and a date.
Think about it. If I were to just stop you on the street today and ask you this really simple question, who invented the first car in history? What would you say? You might confidently throw out a name like Carl Benz or, maybe Henry Ford if you're thinking about mass production. But the truth is so much messier than that and infinitely more interesting. You see, the crucial point here is that there really isn't just one magic name I can give you. It all depends entirely on what you mean when you say car. Are we talking about any self-propelled machine? Or actually, wait, are we talking about a gasoline-powered cart? Or are we strictly defining it as a practical, integrated vehicle designed for everyday human use? Your answer totally changes based on your definition. Section 1. The mystery of the first car. Let's kick off our investigation by zooming way out and looking at the immense timeline of human engineering. People had been dreaming of self-propelled vehicles since Leonardo da Vinci back in the 15th century. But making it a reality took centuries of trial, error, and, well, some pretty spectacular failures. It brilliantly shows us that the invention of the car wasn't some single eureka moment by a lone genius. It was this chaotic, centuries-long evolution bouncing around competing technologies. We had steam, we had early gas experiments, and finally, integrated gasoline engines. It's literally a relay race across history. Section 2. The era of steam monsters. Right, so our very first major suspect in this historical whodunit wasn't building a commuter vehicle at all. Long before gasoline was even an option, we were living in the era of absolute steam monsters. Back in 1769, a French military engineer named Nicolas Joseph Cugnot built the Fardier à vapeur. And let me tell you, this was not something you'd take on a grocery run. It was a massive 2.5-ton, three-wheeled steam-powered beast. Its one and only job was to haul heavy artillery cannons for the French army without using horses. So in that specific sense, it was the first full-sized, self-propelled mechanical land vehicle. But while it was absolutely groundbreaking, Cugnot's machine was also incredibly impractical. I mean, it crawled along at a top speed of just 3.6 kilometers per hour. And because the boiler's design was so poor, the driver had to completely stop the vehicle every 15 minutes just to build up enough steam to keep moving. Just imagine taking a road trip with those kinds of pit stops. And to make matters worse, that massive steam boiler was mounted entirely over the single front wheel, making the whole thing terrifyingly unstable and pretty much impossible to steer. In fact, the story goes that in 1771, his second prototype lost control and smashed right into a solid brick wall. So Cugnot didn't just give us one of the first self-propelled vehicles, he also holds the highly dubious honor of being in the world's very first car accident. Section 3. Early Pioneers and Gasoline Engines. Okay, so if giant steam artillery haulers were a bit of a dead end for personal transport, let's look at the early pioneers of gasoline and see how we eventually get to the cars we know today. Enter an Austrian inventor named Siegfried Marcus. In 1870, which is more than a decade before Carl Benz, mind you, Marcus managed to take a liquid gasoline internal combustion engine and mount it right onto a simple handcart. That essentially makes him one of the very first people to successfully propel a vehicle using petrol. But get this, and it's a huge catch. To actually start the Marcus cart, you couldn't just turn a key or even crank a handle. No, the driver had to physically lift the rear drive wheels entirely off the ground and spin them by hand just to get the engine running. Definitely not the most convenient setup for a quick getaway, right? On top of that, Marcus's machine was basically a motorized wheelbarrow. It completely lacked seats for passengers, it had zero steering mechanism, and crucially, it had no brakes. Marcus himself was actually so frustrated by how totally impractical it was that he dismantled the entire thing by 1873. So it was an engine on a cart, sure, but it wasn't quite an automobile yet. Section 4. Carl Benz and Integrated Innovation. All right, this brings us to the guy who usually gets the crown, marking a massive shift from slap-together experiments toward true integrated innovation. Carl Benz doesn't get the credit just because he used gasoline. He gets it because in 1885, he designed the Benz patent motor wagon.
This was the very first holistic vehicle where the engine, the tubular steel chassis, and the drivetrain were engineered from the ground up as a single unified system. He didn't just bolt a motor to an old horse carriage, he built a machine that was meant to be a motor car from day one. The engineering here was honestly way ahead of its time. It featured a tiny, super lightweight 0.954-liter engine producing less than 1 horsepower. He included an evaporative water cooling system and electrical ignition. And he deliberately chose a 3-wheel design with rack and crank steering simply because reliable 4-wheel steering just hadn't been perfected yet. He needed it to be light, and he needed it to actually handle well on the rough roads of the time. Because of this brilliant, holistic design, Benz applied for a patent, and this officially documented patent, number 37355, granted in 1886, is exactly why history widely views Carl Benz as the true father of the modern, practical, marketable automobile. It is literally considered the birth certificate of the car. Section 5. Bertha Benz's Historic Journey. Now, as any engineer will gladly tell you, inventing something in a workshop is one thing, but proving it actually works out in the real world is a whole different ballgame. By 1888, Carl Benz was really struggling to market his invention. The public was super skeptical. So in August of that year, without Carl's knowledge, and reportedly while he was literally fast asleep, his incredibly daring wife Bertha packed up their 2 teenage sons and snuck the motor wagon out of the workshop. She embarked on a 180-kilometer round trip from Mannheim to Pforzheim. This was the world's very first long-distance automobile road trip. I absolutely love this part. The journey was anything but smooth, but this is where Bertha showcased absolute mechanical genius. When the fuel line clogged up, she just cleared it using her long hat pin. When an ignition wire short-circuited, she insulated it using her own garter. And when the wooden brakes started to wear down and fail, she just had a local cobbler nail leather to them, effectively inventing brake pads on the fly. Plus, she had to stop at a local pharmacy to buy Ligroin, a cleaning solvent, to use as fuel, making that random pharmacy the world's first gas station. Her dusty, triumphant arrival in Pforzheim definitively proved to a deeply skeptical public that this noisy, weird-looking machine was actually totally practical for extended travel. Bertha's bold stunt generated massive publicity and completely secured the financial future and the lasting legacy of what would eventually become Mercedes-Benz. Section 6. Is history repeating itself? As we wrap up this explainer, let's take a step back, look at the fascinating technological rivalry of that early era, and ask a very modern question. You know, we often forget that by the year 1900, the internal combustion engine wasn't actually the undisputed king of the road at all. Early electric vehicles were highly competitive. Think about it. Electric cars were quiet, they were clean, and you could start them instantly with a simple switch. Gasoline cars, on the other hand, they were incredibly noisy, smelled terrible, and required a highly dangerous heavy hand crank to start, which, by the way, caused a ton of broken arms and severe injuries. In fact, inventors like Thomas Parker in the UK and William Morrison in the US were building highly practical, reliable, multi-passenger electric vehicles long before Henry Ford ever popularized the gas-guzzling Model T. Electric cars really only lost out back then because gasoline suddenly became dirt cheap, and the electric starter was finally invented for gas cars, completely eliminating that dangerous hand crank. So as we transition our global infrastructure back to electric cars today, pouring billions and billions into battery technology and charging stations, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. As we build what we confidently call the future of mobility, are we really creating the future? Or are we just picking up an abandoned, brilliant threat from 130 years ago?